Sandeep, start please. Sandeep, you are muted.
Yeah. Good afternoon, dear members, our esteemed audience, our guest speaker, Dr. Zeven Herzi, Mr. Rajesh Nath, Managing Director of VDMA India, and the moderator of today's session. A hearty welcome to all of you in today's webinar. A very interesting topic of balance sheet inventory management, organized by the VDMA India in association with Benteler Trading International, a prominent VDMA member, as our knowledge partner. Friends, we all hope that you and your families, our employees, are all safe and doing well. I am Sandeep Roy, based out of Calcutta office of VDMA, and will be taking you through the initial part of today's webinar. Friends, before we enter the main phase of the webinar, a brief about VDMA. VDMA is the largest industrial association of Europe. Started in 1892, it's a 127 years old organization working in the engineering field. For ease of operation, VDMA is divided into 39 engineering vertical, beginning from agriculture to wood. VDMA has more than 3,300 members, of which 1.03 million of employees, who produce almost around 232 billion worth of production, out of which are hoping 78% are exported. VDMA sense the opportunities of the BRICS nation in early 90s, and as a result of that, established their first foreign offices in India. Followed by the success, they set up the base in China, Brazil, and Russia later on. VDMA was also one representative office in Brussels for the coordination of the European activities. Friends, before we continue, we would like to remind all of you that you can post all your questions during the webinar under the question sections, and they would be answered during the question and answer session. Now I would like to invite Mr. Nath for his welcome address. Mr. Nath is the face of the VDMA India since inception around 2 decades before. He has more than 29 years of experience working in various industries in Germany and India. He is accorded the Cross of Order of Merit, the highest civilian award from the German president for promoting Indo-German trade. He has a degree in Bachelor of Engineering in Mechanical with distinction. He has also a business management degree in International Business Program from the prestigious Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata in 2004. So without further delay, I hand over the proceeding to Mr. Nath. Over to you, Mr. Nath.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you for the kind words and the introduction. Good afternoon, friends. Thank you for joining us for this interesting web seminar today on a very relevant and pertinent topic on off-balance sheet inventory management, being organized by the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, along with our competent partner today, Benteler Trading International. I extend a warm welcome to our speaker, Dr. Sven Herzig, Global Head of Sales, Benteler Trading International AG. Friends, the pandemic has triggered a debate as to whether the global value chain, which are production networks that seek to exploit gains from hyper-specialization across countries, may lead to increased fragility of economies actively participating in them. As the experiences during the ongoing pandemic suggest, major demand and supply side shocks to value chains and lack of redundancy planning in such networks have posed considerable challenges to just-in-time manufacturing activities, arguably accentuating the economic vulnerability for countries, including India. Over the last decade, the system of international production has been grappling with challenges arising from Industry 4.0, growing economic nationalism, and sustainability concerns. The ongoing pandemic has fueled calls for further deglobalization of such production networks to reduce industry and economy level vulnerabilities. The stagnation of GVC trade since the global financial crisis and the unfavorable impact of the ongoing pandemic notwithstanding, there are substantial merits of widening and deepening links to global value chains, particularly for a developing country like India. As per the World Bank's World Development Report 2020, also called WDR20, suggests global value chains can help reduce poverty and continue to augment growth and employment. In fact, cross-country estimates suggest that a 1% increase in GVC participation can boost the per capita income by more than 1%, particularly when countries engage in limited and advanced manufacturing. The growth is much higher than the 0.2% income gain from standard trade. The report suggests that GVC firms engaged in manufacturing activities show higher labor productivity than one-way traders or non-traders after controlling for firm-level capital intensity. In particular, firms that engage in both import and export are 76% more productive than non-trading firms, compared with the 42% difference for export-only firms and a 20% difference for import-only firms. Further, the backward participation in global value chains can be particularly beneficial for economies. A 10% increase in the level of GVC participation could increase average productivity by close to 1.6%. While China has seen a rise in its forward GVC participation and a corresponding drop in the backward participation, the trend has just been opposite for India. India's share of foreign value added content in total GVC trade has steadily increased from 53% in 2005 to 61% in 2014. If India can seize FDI looking to relocate from China and create conditions for firms to leverage the labor cost arbitrage opportunities, it can capture much of the value addition at the midstream stage. This will, however, necessitate deeper reforms in labor markets, trade infrastructure, and improvement in the overall business environment. Policies directed towards facilitating vertical GVC linkages between domestic SMEs and larger foreign and domestic firms can go a long way towards strengthening India's relative position in GVC trade. The OECD Metro model shows that localized regimes, less reliant on foreign suppliers, are more vulnerable to shocks and result in a significantly lower level of economic activity and fall in national incomes as compared to interconnected regimes. While interconnected regimes built resilience, stability, and flexibility in production networks, localized regimes offer fewer channels for adjustment to shocks. Estimate for India suggests that a shift towards a localized regime can decrease GDP by 1.1% and reduce import and export demand by 11.4 and 14.8% respectively. Recent policy pronouncement for an Atmanirbhar Bharat should not be aimed at self-isolation, but should contribute to the spirit of efficiency-seeking economic interdependence, typified by GVCs in the long term. However, friends, in the business world, you want your items as close to their final destination as possible. Or even more complicated, you might need multiple warehouse solutions strategically located throughout the country. Would be looking for good inventory management systems. Our partner today, Benteler Trading International, has already thought of how companies can significantly save in cost of goods purchased while improving their key performance indicators, achieve strategic goals, and optimize their balance sheets. So friends, let us hear it now from Dr. Sven Herzig, Global Head of Sales, Benteler Trading International AG. Before that, however, we would like to run a poll question with you. So let's have the poll question now. So friends, our poll question is working capital a constraint closely monitored in your organization? And the options are yes, no, and planning in the near term. So we'll give about 30-40 seconds for our participants to kindly give their view. So can we close the poll now and we'll see the results? So majority of the participants, large majority, 84%, feel that the working capital is a constraint, and 3% say no, and I think very encouragingly 13% are also planning it in the near term. Friends, now it's a proud privilege for me to introduce Dr. Sven Herzig, Global Head of Sales, Benteler Trading International. Dr. Herzig has worked for Salzgitter AG for 11 years in the precision tube division. Thereafter, he transferred to Benteler Distribution as Global Sales Director for Mechanical Engineering. And since 2015, has worked at Benteler Trading as Head of Sales. Pleasure to have you with us today, Dr. Herzig, and we look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're living, in which part of the world. Mr. Roy and Mr. Nath, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today. Yeah, I would suggest, let us kick straight into the topic. Before I get started, maybe I also want to mention my connection to VDMA. My history, my PhD actually was derived from a topic where we were working with Liebherr as one of the German big crane manufacturers, together with the VDMA under a framework to optimize the low temperature service of hydraulic cylinders. So this is where I started I finalized my engineering career. So I have very good memories of VDMA, and that's why I immediately said this is something where we want to jump onto and do a presentation for companies that are interested in our models. Yeah, I guess the poll very nicely showed what we were expecting. It's not a surprise to us that over 80% say working capital is an issue or is closely monitored in the corporates. And our solution is with more working capital, you are improving your KPIs. That sounds like a bit odd to start with, but we'll talk you through what that means. So going forward, this could really be a game changer for local Indian companies buying locally in India, but also importing goods when they look into using our models. So what we are saying is you could even lower your cost by increasing your stock levels, your inventory, and your working capital. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, I think I was already introduced. I'm with Benteler since 5 years. Now we're going to start right into the, let's say, shortcomings of modern supply chains. So on the plus side, of course, what happens today is that the cost of carrying are reduced in terms of very short and tightly managed supply chains and inventory levels. Also, the opportunity cost of these inventories are lower when they are tightly monitored and managed. The backside of it, or the downside of it, is of course you have, with a low allocation of working capital, you have a very big just-in-time pressure. That means also your buffers on each side of the supply chain are typically very low, which in most of the cases that we looked into and we know led to expedited freight, which are not sometimes, monitored onto the flows, but they are costs that are in a company and that can be excluded if buffer levels are increased. But again, the increase would happen, and I come to that later, in our balance sheet and not in the corporate's balance sheet, and therefore is not an issue on the KPIs. The other negative thing on lower stock levels is, of course, production cannot optimize their schedules because there is not the opportunity to bundle certain production lots, and also frequent deliveries of materials in smaller lots, so half-full trucks, etc., are a result. The other thing is what people or companies typically try to do is that they say, well, we ask the supplier to deliver us the goods DAP or DDP, which of course means the working capital is off your balance sheet, but that also means that you are inviting the supplier to calculate their cost of capital into the offer that they are going to make to you. So any kind of local consignment arrangements or change of Incoterms towards delivered are usually lead to an increase in price. And if we can now go to the next slide, please. So the solution for this can be inventory trading. Inventory trading is basically something which Benteler Trading came up with. Benteler Trading historically has been a steel trader, and we took the knowledge that we gained in the Benteler Group, being a 140 years old industrial conglomerate, and into the Benteler Group, we have been a classical steel trader, and we at the second stage managed internal or intercompany supply chains from one side of Europe, for example, to the US, and we took out the working capital in between. And this learning that we have achieved here, we took to transfer the steel trading to a general inventory trading solution, which means we can literally buy any product, raw materials, semi-finished goods, finished goods. And what happens in the supply chains that we are looking into is shown on the next slide. So what typically happens is we insert ourselves between yourselves and your suppliers, which we call our inbound model, or between yourselves and your clients, which we call the outbound model. We become either your customer or your supplier, and the implementation is very simple. It's a standard IT implementation process, so you won't feel the implementation of us at all. So the physical supply chain will not at all be disrupted. Your purchasing people will speak with the same suppliers, will agree pricing, will do everything what is needed to put the product in place. However, then we will take over these products. We will take the risk of freight, take the risk of loss, take the transportation risk, storage risk, so any other topics are managed through us. Also the credit risk, of course, and we are maneuvering then the goods from either from your supplier to yourselves, or if we become your client, we would then buy the goods immediately off from you and hold them up until your final client will need them. So that means for your balance sheet, you would have on the inbound side a delayed invoice and, so to say, also inventory recognition, whereas on the outbound side, you would have an accelerated revenue recognition. So both stabilizes the balance sheet, and we can have a look at the right side. There are the benefits. So as I said earlier, the deferred recognition of raw materials and incoming goods, the earlier revenue recognition on the outbound goods, and of course the improvements of significant financial KPIs, because the goods are not with you anymore. They are up until we invoice you or you sell them to us. They are immediately or up until then into our balance sheet. We have other efficiencies and synergies that we can lift in logistics, procurement, and production. We have a separate slide on that later. The other very positive thing is by inserting us into the supply chain, you will generate additional liquidity outside of your balance sheet. So that means cash comes in without having debt, or to turn that around, and typically our client do a mixture of both. You would not only use that facility to generate cash, but also to buffer your supply chain without having the additional working capital in your books. So that again will derive the additional benefits from that later. Our cost, and this is the big plus of the side of the story, our carrying cost of that inventory are much closer to your cost of debt than they are to the weighted average cost of capital on any corporate's balance sheet. So typically, depending on which currency you have your accounts in, your working capital costs are somewhere between 6-7% and up to 12%. Our financing, again, is very close to the borrowing cost of a bank plus a service fee that we will charge. So it's much more economical to look at inventories on that side. To summarize that again, BTI could become your customer, could become your supplier. The product that it works for is everything tools work, like tools for, we have a lot of tier 1 automotive clients. They are asking us to become their basically EPC and deliver them a completed tool, which is typically not value adding for 6 to 12 months. It works for raw materials, it works for components, and it works also for semi-finished. And especially one unique thing of our model is intercompany flows. We can also, let's say, from a production entity in Europe, buy the goods, hold them up until India, for example, and then sell them domestically to your production entity or to your service entity in India. So that's a very big scope of the model. And yeah, let's look to the next slide, and then we can give you a couple of examples. So we've put down two examples which are, I think quite simple to understand. Through the additional buffer that I mentioned earlier, that we have on each side of the supply chain, we always aim for fully utilizing any logistics mode that we have. So on the left side, we have given an example. A truck is traveling 600 kilometers at the cost of 1.50, so 1.5 euros per kilometer. That means the truck costs you 900 euros no matter what. In average, and we have done this on a broader scope with some companies that we did a survey with, very large corporate manufacturing companies in Europe, the average truck load is round about 18 tons. Very simple mathematics, the cost per ton which that leads to is round about 50 euros per ton. If you're transporting for 900 euros, 600 kilometers and have the truck loaded with 18 tons, that costs you 50 euros per ton. So what we are saying now on the right side is we would always try to 100% will never work, but that's of course the aim. We will always try to have enough stock on the outbound and on the inbound south that any transportation leg will fully be utilized. That means the same 900 euros that the 600 kilometer cost you will just be resulting in a lower cost per ton because the truckload is now 22 tons, the maximum that you can transport in Europe generally. And that immediately leads, as you can see, to a new cost per ton of 41 euros, which is around about 20% reduction. This is just one example, and I think as your background is, I guess, financial, production, and also supply chain, this works for shiploads, this works for container business, so any kind of transportation mode you use, we were trying to aim for the same thing, not sending a small lot first and then a half full truck. We would always try to have ample stock on both sides of the supply chain to make sure that we can leverage on these advantages. So the next example, please. So the second example is the production environment. Typically, again, to the just-in-time pressure, to working capital constraints, we see a lot of corporates changing their machine equipments many times per month, per week, whatever the increment is that you want to look into. We have made this example here, one product, and the machines are changed eight times a month. So anytime you change it, you have scrap, or let's say you cut off two pieces when you change the machine, which comes to 2 pieces of scrap in a month, you have 16 pieces that you have to scrap and throw away. On the right side, we're just saying, well, through the additional working capital that we are giving to the companies without increasing their working capital as such, we would just do only 2 setups of the same machine for the same product per month. That was, of course, the same 2 pieces of waste are appearing, and the total reduction of the waste is now to 4 pieces in total per month for the same product without any negative working capital constraints. So that means by 75%, you reduce your scrap rate for that specific product and also up your equipment efficiency, which means lower setups means more time to produce goods. And again, we have put down here 10%. I guess that's an ambitious number, but we have seen cases between 5–6% of equipment efficiency increase in equipment up to 12%. So it's a lot of headroom to generate savings here by optimizing the production if you have the opportunity to have more stocks in your supply chains through our off-balance inventory model. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, now we're summarizing a bit our thoughts in terms of financial carrying costs of inventory, just to give you a thought where we think the advantage can sit from a commercial point of view. So what we are saying, as I said earlier, weighted average cost of capital in Europe is typically 6 to 8%, US typically a bit higher, and I would suggest in India, looking at INR, it is even a bit higher than that. But let's assume something between 6 and 8%. And then, of course, you have the opportunistic cost of carrying that inventory, which means your capital is tied up in inventory and is not value adding. Whenever it's stored or just on the water and it belongs to you, You cannot use this money to alternative sources. You cannot invest it for new business. You don't generate the margin that you typically would generate when you run your machines and when you operate the business. So summing that up, the total financial carrying cost of inventory is, from our point of view, somewhere between 15 and 25%. So that's a big number. Let's look to the next slide, how we can think we're gonna redo it, the look of how to see inventories. Let's start on the conservative side and not just look on the opportunistic cost, let's just make the exercise of us being implemented in a supply chain. And I think 6% is very much on the high side, but just to run you through that example, if our cost of carrying inventory would be 6%, we are saying that by generating or summarizing the efficiencies that one could get from what we said earlier in the two examples, logistics bundling, optimization in freights, and a third thing that we haven't mentioned but that also has a huge impact is the volume bundling. Of course, if you implement us, you can buy more from a supplier than you typically would with working capital constraints. That means some have like prices, if you buy, like we have discussed with a German plant construction company very recently, they buy a lot of forgings, and there were prices of, if you buy 10 forgings, which last them for 1 quarter, if you buy 20, which would last for half a year, or if they buy 40, which would last them for a year, they typically tend to buy, because of working capital constraints, only 10 pieces every quarter. And we saw that if we would buy the annual volume of 40 pieces and store them, the savings on every piece would be 10%. So there is huge opportunities also in bundling production and making use of bigger lot sizes that we haven't put down an example. But summarizing these three saving opportunities, logistics, production, and also procurement, we see that at least 12% on an annualized basis can be saved. And that means not only you have improved KPIs, but you also achieve really net landed cost savings. So in that case, if we really would together be able to lift that 12%, you would have, let's say, free lending from us, improved KPIs, plus your landed cost would be reduced. So this is something, again, as I said earlier, it's unique. It could be a game changer if you look at it with the entire team. Typically, we need basically 3 to 4 functions from a corporate that look into this. Is typically logistics colleagues, of course, procurement people, of course, treasury and accounting. So if you have these people, let's say, lined up, it is a great opportunity to improve your balance sheet, but not only that, reduce costs overall when you're purchasing. Next slide. Yeah, this is again a summary. I think here it's mentioned again, and we basically touched base on this. So you have these 3 areas: logistics, production, and procurement. You're reducing the just-in-time pressure. You could reimagine schedules, which means production. You could do volume consolidations on the freights in the production environment. Yourself as a producing company can reduce or increase batch sizes and optimize your internal production, run longer cycles with less wastage. You have also typically an increase in quality when you don't change the machine setup so often. And on the right side in procurement, we see, as we touched base earlier, on volume discounts, early payment discounts. This is also a point to mention. If you implement us, we don't mind when to pay a client. So if you have typically 60 days payment term with a client, we can pay the client immediately. And that means typically you get like a sconto, that's the German word of it, so it's early payment discount in English. And there is also additional saving potential. And last but not least, of course, by introducing us, you could see us as a global procurement platform, and that means reduced administrative costs, because we become one of your large suppliers, and a lot of small suppliers could be onboarded through our platform. And this is also often a steering KPI for many companies, that they want to reduce their numbers of suppliers, which can easily happen if we step into that supply chain. Yeah, overall, I think let me summarize. It is a great opportunity to relook inventory, to relook stock levels. We can do this with our partner Deutsche Bank, also locally in India. So in the past, we also said we would focus purely on imports, on euros or dollar currency mainly. But since a couple of weeks, Deutsche Bank has also signalized us that it would be possible to finance the same concept locally, which means we could buy an INR, we could sell an INR, and let's say implement a solution like this locally in India. So I guess that was the entire overview. Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much. I understand the colleagues from VDMA would share this presentation with the attendees, and I leave it to Mr. Naad to moderate further. Maybe I think there is another poll upcoming, and then I guess
yes, that's right.
Would be open for questions, of course. If you have any, we're happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to further discussions.
Thank you, Dr. Herzig, for a very interesting and informative presentation. And especially, I think the examples you gave, very illustrious examples, and clearly highlight also the benefit of using BTI. Friends, we would run the second poll, and after that, we would take up the questions also. So please feel free. We have some questions already coming in, and if there are more questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box, please. Yeah. So friends, the next poll question is, would more stocks allow you to optimize production and avoid expedited freights? So of course, the options are yes or no. So kindly give your feedback here. So we'll just wait for a few more seconds for the audience to complete the response. So can we close the poll? So 74% of the participants said yes and 26% no. So certainly, would more stocks allow you to optimize production and avoid expedited freights? So thank you for this feedback, audience. And that's it. We have some questions.
Our assumptions that this is confirming our assumptions that we think that with additional stocks, there is a lot of optimizations to be lifted. This is exactly what we assumed and confirming what we think our model can do for production companies. Yeah, right. Happy to hear your questions or read your questions.
Yes, Dr. Herzig. So there's a question which says, is your model suitable only for engineering production or applicable to other industries also, like consumer goods industry also?
So we have it's very product agnostic. So anything works, raw materials, commodities like coal, iron ore, semi-finished components. We do a lot in tools, as I said earlier, tier 1 tools for, let's say, dashboard production. We are also doing electronic components. It's really, anything works, any industry. There's, of course, some obstacles like pharmaceutical with a lot of regulations. Technically, yes, but again, we need to then, in the pharmaceutical space, we have looked in a couple of cases, but there's something which we haven't executed due to it needs us to be qualified according to a lot of standards, which we don't have. But otherwise, there's not much limitations that we see now. So it works. Sometimes we also, an interesting thing in Europe right now is CO2 certificates. So also big energy producing companies ask us to hold CO2 certificates for them, which is also something intangibles that also works.
Another very interesting question, Dr. Herzig, is, does Benteler come on board as a customer or as a supplier?
Yeah, good question. Both works. If we should insert ourselves between your suppliers and yourselves, we become a customer, which means we would buy from the supplier, we would hold the goods during transport and during storage, and then we would invoice them to you when they arrive. So that means we would become a supplier for you, but on the outbound side, between yourselves and your clients, we would become your customer and sell the goods on to the final client. Of course, then it's modeled against the risk profile of the final client. Sometimes the sales people of our companies that we partner with have some constraints. Of course, the interface to the supplier, to the final client is an issue that needs to be addressed. But what some companies also do with us, they look into intercompany flows. And that means we would become a customer, we would buy the goods from a production facility in India, and then we would transport them to the US and sell it to the sales organization of the same company. So it would become an intercompany business. But again, we would become the customer of the Indian producing entity, and we would become a supplier for the, let's say, same corporate, but on the sales organization in a different continent. And then this sales organization could sell it on to the final client, which then doesn't even, then the final client doesn't even see that we are inserted into that supply chain. So both works, we can become both.
Right. In fact, there's a related question also, Dr. Herzig. Will Benteler services be available between Indian customers and suppliers, or is it only for import and export?
Yeah, I think I briefly touched on this. Maybe this question was a bit earlier. Yes, in the past, we said we purely focus on imports or exports because of the currency issue. But since Deutsche Bank has now signalized us, they would also be willing, since they are strong historically, like VDMA in India, they said, let's also start exploring local business. It means we could buy from Indian domestic suppliers and sell to Indian domestic production companies. Yes.
Right. Also, Dr. Herzig, in India, actually, the transport companies also provide warehousing. So how would that be different from your model?
The difference from what we understand is the logistics companies, they offer the warehousing, that's correct, but they don't own the goods. We would own the goods in the warehouse. And typically in the warehouse of a logistic company, it's either owned by the supplier or by the buyer, but not by a third party. So typically the scope of the logistics company ends when it comes to buying the stocks and holding the stocks. What we are doing is we can use the exact same arrangement of that warehousing company. The only difference would be the supplier could immediately sell to Benteler. Benteler would pay the supplier, hold the goods in transit and in the warehouse, and then basically the client, the producing company, calls it off on the day when they need it, and only then they would receive an invoice from Benteler. So that's the difference. Difference really is that we own physically the goods. Right. So title and possession is with us.
Another interesting question, Dr. Herzig, is by having Benteler on board, will it not increase the administration cost, which is generally higher than operational cost in most industries?
No, I mean, look, we have a SAP for HANA system, which is state of the art. This is a one-time EDI interface that we need to insert, and then you as our potential partners and clients could order with us automatically through EDI, and we would order from all the suppliers. So basically going forward, you have just us as I said, as a platform provider, and that would route through all the orders that you are sending us, and it would be fully visible for the clients what is in our possession and in our storages. So it gives full transparency, but also at the same time, we think even administration efforts can be lowered because you're reducing the number of suppliers and invoices.
And the companies would also, you mentioned, Dr. Herzig, sort of get some discounts on the freight volumes?
The freight savings typically come from by fully utilizing the trucks. What we always see in Europe, as I said earlier, trucks are 80% loaded. And also you have like LCL container freights. So what we would try, and LCL is usually much more expensive than if you have steady flow of full containers. So with these things, we easily think we can save 10 to 20% on the freights. Yeah. Again, the prerequisite, of course, for all this is to have more stock, right? You have to have, we would ask the suppliers to pre-produce a little bit, and we would buffer this in our balance sheet.
Okay. There's a question also related to supply chain financing. How does the BTI solution differ from typical supply chain financing?
Yeah, the main difference is, I think it's for factoring and reverse factoring, you always need an invoice. You can factor an invoice once you have sold the goods to a client. Let's look at the outbound first. So every company that I know typically has 4 weeks of finished inventory sitting in their outgoing goods warehouse, which is unsold and or not invoiced. So what we could do, we could buy these stocks even before invoicing, and that's the big difference. And the same on the inbound side, we don't create an invoice, and that is, we trade the materials, we own the materials, and you could not factor something which has not been invoiced. So that's the main difference. So we tackle the area of inventory which doesn't require an invoice, and that distinguishes us from the classical supply chain financing solutions.
Right. Also, a related question, Dr. Herzig, is how does non-moving inventory due to sudden market demand drop is handled by Benteler in between with respect to inventory risks? Yes.
Yeah, good questions. So what we do is we agree a financing line with the client. Let's say 10 million is a bit too small. Typically, we aim for 50 million or equivalent INR. And then we don't really care how long inventory sits in our balance sheet, as long as it's within the agreed financial framework. So we can hold, I mean, this is a very good point, actually. Demand fluctuations, we can always buffer as long as they don't overshoot the maximum credit line that we have agreed. So if a product, for example, was deemed to sit 3 months in our inventory and now it's 9 months, we don't care. That just is okay. That is our standard business. And we are fine with it. Again, the only thing that we need to monitor is the maximum financial exposure that our vehicle can digest, and this has pre-agreed. But again, there's always transparency and visibility around that.
And then there is also a question, Dr. Herzig, how will goods returned be handled? Would Benteler buy without resource?
Goods returned to the suppliers.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, that can work backwards as well. Like returns would also go through our model. We would then, I mean, if the claim that is, if the claim is accepted, we could pay out the customer and we could claim back from the supplier. It works both ways, of course, with credit note, debit note, anything what is needed. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. What about the insurance part, Dr. Herzig? Will Benteler take care of insurance? And in case there are certain conflicts, how would that be addressed, Dr. Herzig? So
insurance is maybe, just for clarification, we have typically 2 things of insurance, like the classical trade credit insurance, like the Atradius, Coface, Euler Hermes. This is not required because we are working with a bank. And if Deutsche Bank, for example, says they would allocate a 50 million line on a client in India, then there is no trade credit insurance as such. The other insurance, potentially like the transport insurance, fire insurance, warehousing insurance, these insurances must be with us or with the freight forwarder, because during the process of transportation and storage, we have all the risk and it is insured. Like we have, for example, a very large marine cargo insurance that covers all these cases typically. Yes, that sits with us.
Then there's a question related to taxation, Dr. Herzig. This is regarding our goods and service tax. How does the GST work if Benteler is supplier or customer for the same company?
Well, this is a kind of not so much in my sweet spot of expertise in India, but typically what would, let's say, GST locally in Europe, I mean, it's just pass through, right? We would buy we would buy from the supplier, we would claim back the GST, and then we would invoice our service fee plus the new GST to the client. So it's like, assume it's with any other supplier very similar. So that doesn't impact the price at all.
Right. Maybe my last question, Dr. Herzig, is typically, who are your clients, Dr. Herzig?
Yeah, I mean, our sweet spot for now is the tier 1 automotive space. We just in the stage of finalizing a large agreement with a French tier 1 automotive supplier. We are live with a Swiss and a German tier 1 automotive supplier. So this is the tool space where we buy the tools and finish the work that is around the tools, which take, again, as I said earlier, 6 to 12 months typically. The other sweet spot that we have is electronic components. So we work with a partner in 5G antenna for the 5G mobile network rollout. We are buying the electronic components and we are selling the components to the EMS, which is typically the assemblers like Foxconn, Jabil, Sanmina, these kind of companies. So we are holding and shipping the electronic goods. And another area is the CO2 certificates that I touched base on. This is typically with large energy, like coal producers. We are talking to, in Germany, there is supposed to come up a law that also requires for the petrol companies to have compensation on CO2 certificates. And they ask us to buffer some of the certificates and use us as a trading platform for these CO2 certificates. So this is, let's say, 3 main areas that our services for now. Pharmaceuticals, not so much. But again, any other industry that one wants to look with us is doable. And I would say generally production companies have inventory and they are naturally more a target and a partner for us than, for example, like, let's say, marketing, the Adidas of this world. This is typically not so much. It's really, that's why we're talking to you guys, the VDMA, because you're all producing companies. And this is, I would say, our sweet spot.
Right. So that means you have a good broad range of customers, yes, also, Dr. Herzig. Right. Yeah. So I think, Dr. Herzig, thank you very much for taking the questions. We had a lot of questions coming in today from our participants. So I would like to conclude this session. The benefits of good inventory management include saving of time, resources, and also support with other aspects like a better location for your products and the ability to have a better grasp on the inventory. I would like to conclude with a quote from Wale Safwat, the global award-winning executive. He said, "It is not the organizations that are competing, it's the supply chain that are competing." And I think this pandemic has also highlighted this. On behalf of VDMA and our partners today, Benteler Trading International, thank you, Dr. Herzig, first of all, and wishing all our members and friends who have participated in this web seminar today in such good numbers the very best for the festive season, and wishing you all a very successful, prosperous, resilient year 2021. Stay well, stay safe, and stay connected. So thank you very much for joining, and have a nice weekend. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Right.
Hope to speak to you soon later individually. Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yes, we look forward. Thank you.